The sun was setting over the quiet streets of Highland Park, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Alex Chen, a 19-year-old college sophomore, was driving his well-maintained Honda Civic back from his evening study group. His father had always taught him to be extra careful while driving, keep both hands on the wheel, stay under the speed limit, and always use turn signals. Being a senator's son didn't mean he was above the law. As Alex turned onto Maple Avenue, he noticed the flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. His heart skipped a beat, even though he knew he hadn't done anything wrong. He did exactly what his parents had taught him, pulled over safely, turned off the engine, and placed his hands where they would be visible on the steering wheel. Through his side mirror, Alex watched as Officer Davidson approached, his walk stiff and purposeful. Something felt off right away. The officer's hand was already resting on his holster, his face set in a hard expression that made Alex's stomach tighten with anxiety. License and registration, Davidson barked before he'd even reached the window fully. His flashlight beam hit Alex's face with unnecessary intensity, making him squint. "Good evening, officer," Alex said politely, trying to keep his voice steady. "May I reach for my wallet? It's in my back pocket." "Just hurry up," Davidson snapped, his tone dripping with hostility. Every move Alex made seemed to increase the officer's aggression. When Alex carefully handed over his license and registration, Davidson snatched them from his hand. "Get out of the car," Davidson ordered suddenly, making Alex's heart race. "Sir, may I ask why?" "I don't understand what I've done wrong," Alex asked, his voice trembling slightly despite his best efforts to stay calm. "Did I stutter?" Davidson's voice rose sharply. "Out of the car now." By this time, a few people walking their dogs or returning from evening errands had stopped to watch. One elderly couple exchanged worried glances before the woman discreetly pulled out her phone and began recording. Alex slowly unbuckled his seatbelt, movements deliberate and careful. "I'm getting out now, officer," he narrated his actions, just as his father had taught him. The situation was escalating for no reason, and he could feel the tension in the air growing thicker by the second. As soon as Alex stepped out, Davidson roughly grabbed his arm. "Hands against the car, spread your legs." "Officer, please." Alex tried one more time, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was just driving home from study group at the library." "Oh, really?" Davidson's voice dripped with sarcasm. "And I suppose you're going to tell me this is your car too? Pretty nice ride for a kid like you." More people had gathered now, their phones recording the increasingly tense scene. Mrs. Thompson, who lived in the house right across the street, had come out onto her porch, her face etched with concern as she watched the officer's aggressive behavior. "The car is registered in my name," Alex explained calmly, even as Davidson began an unnecessarily rough pat-down. "Everything is in order, officer. You can check the registration I gave you." "Listen here, smart mouth," Davidson growled, pressing Alex harder against the car. "I've dealt with your type before. Think you can just drive through this neighborhood like you own it?" The growing crowd of onlookers murmured uncomfortably. Mr. Patel from the corner store had joined them, his face dark with disapproval as he watched the officer's misconduct unfold. Just then, another set of red and blue lights appeared in the distance. Someone in the crowd must have called for backup, seeing how the situation was spiraling out of control. Alex closed his eyes briefly, saying a silent prayer that whoever was coming would be more reasonable than Officer Davidson. The tension in the air was electric. The evening had started so normally, just a regular drive home from a study session. Now Alex found himself pressed against his car, being treated like a criminal for absolutely no reason, with an audience of concerned neighbors recording every moment. Little did Officer Davidson know, his actions tonight would set off a chain of events that would change not just his own life, but the entire police department's approach to traffic stops. The second patrol car was getting closer now, its siren cutting through the evening air. Alex could only hope that help was truly on the way, as Officer Davidson's grip on his arm tightened even further. The backup patrol car pulled up smoothly to the curb, its headlights illuminating the growing crowd of concerned neighbors. Officer Davidson's grip on Alex's arm hadn't loosened, even as Lieutenant Kim stepped out of her vehicle, her experienced eyes quickly taking in the scene before her. "Everything all right here, Davidson?" she called out, her calm voice cutting through the tension. Lieutenant Kim had been on the force for 15 years, and something about this scene immediately set off warning bells in her mind. "Just dealing with a suspicious character," Davidson replied, his voice tight. "Claims he owns this car, but you know how it is in this neighborhood." The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Mrs. Thompson, still watching from her porch, stepped forward. "I've seen this young man drive past my house every Tuesday and Thursday evening after his study group," she called out. "He's never caused any trouble." Davidson's face reddened. "Ma'am, please stay back. This is police business." Lieutenant Kim approached slowly, her manner professional but questioning. "Davidson, what was the reason for the initial stop?" The officer hesitated for a moment. "Suspicious behavior. Driving too slowly through the neighborhood." "I was going exactly the speed limit," Alex spoke up, his voice steady despite the situation. "My father always taught me to be extra careful while driving." "Did I say you could speak?" Davidson's grip tightened even more, making Alex wince. Lieutenant Kim's eyes narrowed. "Davidson, ease up. Let me see his license and registration." As Davidson reluctantly handed over the documents, Mr. Patel from the corner store stepped forward. "I've known this boy since he was small," he said firmly. "His father is." "I don't care who his father is," Davidson snapped, cutting him off. "This is about maintaining order in our neighborhoods." Lieutenant Kim had been scanning the documents, her expression changing subtly as she read. She looked up at Davidson, then at Alex, then back at the papers. "Officer Davidson, release him. Now." "But Lieutenant." "That's an order, Davidson." The crowd watched as Davidson slowly, reluctantly released his grip on Alex's arm. Alex straightened up, carefully rolling his shoulder to ease the discomfort. "Young man," Lieutenant Kim addressed Alex directly, "I apologize for this situation. You're free to go, but I'm sure we'll need to follow up with you and your father about this incident." At the word father, Davidson's face changed. He grabbed the license again, finally reading it properly. The color drained from his face as he saw the address and the name. "That's right," Alex said quietly, rubbing his sore arm. "Senator Chen is my father. But that shouldn't matter, should it, Officer Davidson? Would you have treated anyone else differently if they weren't a senator's son?" The watching crowd had grown larger, and nearly everyone had their phones out, recording. The evening air was thick with tension and the murmur of voices sharing what they'd witnessed. I was just following protocol," Davidson stammered, but his confidence was crumbling. "Protocol?" Lieutenant Kim's voice was sharp. "Show me where protocol demands treating a cooperative citizen like a criminal during a routine traffic stop. Show me where it requires excessive force and baseless accusations." Mrs. Thompson had walked down from her porch and was standing with several other neighbors. "We've all got it on video," she said firmly. "Every single minute of it." Davidson looked around, suddenly aware of just how many witnesses there were to his behavior. The phones pointed at him seemed to multiply by the second, their camera lenses like accusing eyes. "Report to the station first thing tomorrow morning," Lieutenant Kim ordered Davidson. "We'll be reviewing this incident in detail." She turned to Alex. "Would you like to file a formal complaint now, or would you prefer to do so tomorrow with your father present?" Alex straightened his jacket, his composure remarkable given what he'd just experienced. "I think it would be best to do this properly, with all parties present," he said. "Including everyone here who witnessed it." He gestured to the crowd of neighbors. Mr. Patel stepped forward again. "We will all come. This kind of behavior cannot continue in our community." Lieutenant Kim nodded. "I'll make sure proper procedures are followed." She handed Alex her card. "Please have your father contact me directly." As Alex finally got back into his car, the crowd began to disperse, but their phones told the real story. Within hours, the videos would spread across social media, showing exactly how a routine traffic stop had turned into a glaring example of prejudice and abuse of power. Davidson stood rooted to the spot, watching as Alex drove away, followed by several concerned neighbors in their own cars to ensure he got home safely. The officer's night was far from over, but his career trajectory had just taken a sharp turn, one that would have consequences he couldn't yet imagine. By midnight, the videos had spread like wildfire across social media. Alex sat in his father's home office, watching Senator Chen pace back and forth, phone in hand. The senator's face was a mix of controlled anger and deep concern as he reviewed the footage for the third time. "Are you sure you're okay?" the senator asked his son again, pausing his pacing to look at Alex's arm where Davidson had gripped him. "I'm fine, Dad," Alex assured him, though the emotional weight of the evening was finally starting to sink in, just shaken up. "The neighbors were amazing, though. You should have seen how they all stood up for me." The senator's phone buzzed again. Another news outlet requesting comment. Mrs. Thompson's video had already reached over 1 million views, and the hashtag #JusticeForAlex was trending locally. "Your mother's on her way home from her conference," Senator Chen said, sitting down heavily in his leather chair. "She's catching the first flight back from Washington." Just then, their doorbell rang. Through the security camera feed, they could see Mr. Patel and several other neighbors standing on their doorstep, some still in their evening clothes. "We couldn't sleep," Mrs. Thompson explained when they opened the door. "We had to make sure Alex was really okay." She was clutching a container of homemade cookies, still warm from the oven. The group gathered in the Chen's living room, each one describing what they'd witnessed from their different perspectives. Mr. Patel's teenage daughter had already edited together footage from multiple angles, creating a comprehensive video that left no doubt about Davidson's misconduct. "Look at these comments," she said, showing them her phone. "People are sharing similar experiences they've had with Officer Davidson. This isn't his first time." The senator listened intently, taking notes. His years of working on police reform legislation made him particularly attuned to the significance of what had happened. "We're all willing to testify," said Mr. Rodriguez, who lived 2 doors down. "This kind of behavior has no place in our community or any community." As if on cue, Lieutenant Kim called. The senator put her on speakerphone. "Senator Chen," she began, her voice professional but concerned, "I've spent the last few hours reviewing Officer Davidson's bodycam footage and past complaint records. What I found," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "is deeply troubling." "How troubling?" the senator asked, though he already had a feeling he knew the answer. "Multiple complaints of similar incidents over the past 3 years," Lieutenant Kim replied. "Most were dismissed due to lack of evidence or witnesses willing to come forward. But this time we have video evidence and dozens of witnesses," Alex finished quietly. The neighbors nodded in agreement. Mrs. Thompson reached over and patted Alex's hand. "And we're not going anywhere, dear." The night continued with more calls, more revelations, and more community members showing up to offer support. The Chen's living room became an impromptu command center for what was quickly turning into a movement larger than just one incident. Around 2 a.m., Officer Davidson's police union representative called the station, attempting to get ahead of the situation. But the videos were already viral, and the public reaction was overwhelming. "Dad," Alex said as their neighbors finally started heading home around 3 a.m., "I know this is tough, but maybe some good can come from it. Remember that police accountability bill you've been trying to push through?" Senator Chen looked at his son, struck by his resilience and wisdom in the face of such an ordeal. "You're right. This could be the catalyst we needed." He picked up one of Mrs. Thompson's cookies, now cold, but still a symbol of community support. "But first thing tomorrow, we're filing a formal complaint. Officer Davidson needs to understand that actions have consequences." As the first rays of dawn began to peek through the windows, Alex finally headed up to bed, exhausted but somehow hopeful. His phone kept buzzing with messages of support from friends who'd seen the videos, and even strangers sharing their own stories. The incident that had started as a simple traffic stop was about to become something much bigger, a turning point in the ongoing conversation about police accountability and community relations. And it all began because one officer made the mistake of thinking his badge made him untouchable, while a community proved that together they were unstoppable. The police station buzzed with unusual energy the next morning. Officer Davidson sat stiffly in the waiting area outside the chief's office, watching as officers and staff members walked past, some avoiding eye contact, others giving him disapproving looks. His normally crisp uniform felt suffocating today. Inside the office, Chief Roberts was reviewing the incident footage with Lieutenant Kim and the department's internal affairs representative. The chief's face grew more concerned with each passing minute. 3 million views overnight, the chief said, rubbing his temples. And these previous complaints. He gestured to the stack of files Lieutenant Kim had compiled. Why wasn't this pattern flagged earlier? Before anyone could answer, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Senator Chen, his wife Linda, and Alex. They were accompanied by their family lawyer and, surprisingly, several community members including Mr. Patel and Mrs. Thompson. "Thank you for meeting with us, Chief Roberts," Senator Chen said professionally, though the strain in his voice was evident. Linda kept her hand on Alex's shoulder, her protective instinct visible in every gesture. "Senator, Mrs. Chen, please sit down." Chief Roberts stood, gesturing to the chairs. "We've been reviewing the incident thoroughly." "As have we," the family lawyer responded, placing a tablet on the desk. "We've compiled statements from 27 witnesses, all with video evidence. Additionally, we've uncovered something concerning." Lieutenant Kim leaned forward. "The previous complaints." "Exactly," Mr. Patel spoke up. "My daughter spent all night creating a database. She found social media posts dating back 3 years, people sharing similar experiences with Officer Davidson, but too afraid to file formal complaints." The chief's phone buzzed. Another news outlet requesting comment. The story had gone national. "Bring him in," Chief Roberts decided. He needs to face this directly. When Officer Davidson entered, the tension in the room became palpable. He'd clearly had a sleepless night, his usual arrogance replaced by nervous tension. "Officer Davidson," Chief Roberts began, "would you care to explain your actions last night?" Davidson shifted uncomfortably. "I was following standard procedure for suspicious activity." "Standard procedure?" Linda Chen interrupted, her voice sharp. "Is it standard procedure to rough up a cooperative young man during a routine traffic stop?" "Ma'am, I don't." Lieutenant Kim held up her hand. "We've all seen the footage, multiple angles, body cam, everything." Chief Roberts turned his computer screen, showing Davidson the viral videos. "Care to explain this grip you used?" He paused at a particularly clear frame. "Because our training manual doesn't include this level of force for compliant citizens." The community members began sharing their observations one by one. Mrs. Thompson described how she'd seen Davidson's patrol car circling the neighborhood unusually often. Mr. Rodriguez detailed other incidents he'd witnessed but had been too uncertain to report. "The thing is, Officer Davidson," Senator Chen said calmly, "this isn't just about what happened to my son anymore. This is about a pattern of behavior that has gone unchecked for far too long." Alex, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. "I keep thinking about all the people who didn't have a crowd of witnesses with phones, or a senator for a father. What happened to them?" Davidson's face paled as the chief pulled up more files, documented incidents, civilian complaints, and now a flood of social media posts sharing similar stories. "We're conducting a full investigation," Chief Roberts announced. "Officer Davidson, you're suspended without pay, effective immediately. Please surrender your badge and weapon." But I have rights," Davidson protested. The union rep is already here," Lieutenant Kim cut in. "They've seen the evidence too. This isn't going away with a simple apology." As Davidson was escorted out to turn in his equipment, the Chen family and community members began discussing next steps with the chief. The conversation shifted from this single incident to broader changes needed in the department. "We're establishing a civilian oversight committee," Chief Roberts announced. "And I want your community members involved." He looked at the gathered neighbors. "Your quick actions last night showed us how valuable community engagement can be." Mr. Patel's daughter raised her hand. "I've already created a secure website where people can safely share their experiences. We've received hundreds of submissions since last night." The meeting continued well into the afternoon, transforming from a simple disciplinary hearing into a blueprint for departmental reform. Outside, news vans had begun gathering, but the real story wasn't just about one bad officer anymore. It was about a community coming together to demand change, and a police department finally ready to listen. As they left the station, Alex noticed Officer Davidson sitting alone in his personal car, staring at his surrendered badge. For a moment, their eyes met through the windshield. Davidson quickly looked away, but not before Alex caught a glimpse of something in his expression, perhaps the first real understanding of the consequences of his actions. A week after the incident, the Chen family's living room had transformed into something between a community center and a campaign headquarters. Laptops covered the coffee table, volunteers answered phones, and the walls were covered with papers tracking similar incidents across the state. "Look at these numbers," Mr. Patel's daughter called out, pointing to her screen. Her website had collected over 1,000 testimonials. "We're seeing patterns in certain neighborhoods with specific officers." Senator Chen nodded, making notes for his upcoming speech at the state capitol. The incident with Alex had become a catalyst for something much bigger than anyone expected. Meanwhile, at the police station, Chief Roberts was leading a department-wide meeting. The rows of officers sat in unusual silence as they watched compilation videos of civilian interactions, both good and bad. "This is a wake-up call," the chief announced, standing beside Lieutenant Kim. "Not just for our department, but for law enforcement everywhere. We're implementing immediate changes." In the back of the room, several officers shifted uncomfortably. They'd worked with Davidson, seen his behavior, but had never spoken up. The guilt was visible on their faces. Back at the Chen residence, Alex was preparing for his first televised interview. His mother helped straighten his tie while reporters set up in their garden. "Remember," Linda said softly, "this isn't about revenge. It's about making real change." The interview went live across local stations. Alex spoke clearly and compassionately about his experience, but more importantly, about others who'd faced similar situations without the protection of privilege or power. "What happened to me was wrong," Alex said into the camera, "but I'm lucky. I had witnesses, videos, and resources. Many others don't. That's why we need systemic change." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Phone lines at the police department lit up with people wanting to share their stories. The website crashed temporarily from too much traffic. At his home across town, Officer Davidson watched the interview, his suspended badge sitting on his coffee table. His phone had been ringing nonstop. Journalists wanting comments, fellow officers distancing themselves, and his union rep with increasingly bad news. The investigation had uncovered more than just his misconduct. It revealed a culture of silence that had allowed such behavior to continue. Several officers, inspired by the public support for Alex, had come forward with their own accounts of witnessing Davidson's actions. That evening, the local community center hosted an emergency town hall meeting. The place was packed. Residents, police officers, local officials, and media all squeezed in to participate. Chief Roberts took the podium first. "We're announcing comprehensive reforms," he began. "New training protocols, civilian oversight, body cam requirements, and most importantly, a complete overhaul of how we handle complaints." Lieutenant Kim presented the details: mandatory de-escalation training, community engagement programs, and a new online platform for reporting and tracking police interactions, inspired by Mr. Patel's daughter's website. In the audience, Alex sat with his parents, surrounded by the neighbors who'd stood up for him that night. Mrs. Thompson had brought her famous cookies again, passing them around as people shared their stories and hopes for change. The most powerful moment came when a young officer stood up. "I worked with Davidson," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I saw things but stayed quiet. Never again. We need to be brave enough to hold each other accountable." Her words sparked a chain reaction. Other officers stood up, sharing their own commitments to change. The barrier between police and community began to crack, replaced by genuine dialogue. As the meeting continued late into the night, Senator Chen worked on his laptop, incorporating what he heard into his police reform bill. This wasn't just about punishing one officer anymore, it was about transforming an entire system. Alex watched it all unfold, amazed at how one terrible night had sparked such widespread change. His phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Patel's daughter. The website had just received support from a major civil rights organization. They wanted to take it nationwide. Outside the community center, news crews interviewed participants as they left. The story had evolved from a viral video to a movement for real change. Even those who'd initially defended Davidson had to acknowledge the evidence and the need for reform. "This is just the beginning," Senator Chen told reporters. "Real change takes time, but it starts with people being brave enough to stand up and speak out. As the crowds dispersed into the night, the energy was different from the anger and fear of a week ago. There was hope now and determination. The community had come together not just to address one incident, but to ensure it would never happen again. 1 month later, the state capitol building buzzed with anticipation. The gallery was packed with familiar faces from the community as Senator Chen prepared to introduce his reformed police accountability bill. Alex sat in the front row, flanked by his mother and Mr. Patel's family. The investigation into Officer Davidson had concluded the previous week. The disciplinary board's decision was unanimous: permanent dismissal from the force and a recommendation for criminal charges related to civil rights violations. But today wasn't about punishment, it was about prevention. This bill, Senator Chen began, standing at the podium, was written not just by legislators, but by our community. By police officers who want to serve with honor, by citizens who deserve to feel safe, by everyone who believes in positive change. In the audience, Lieutenant Kin nodded. She'd been promoted to head the department's new Community Relations Division, working directly with civilian oversight committees. The old system protected bad behavior through silence, the senator continued. The new one will protect good officers by ensuring transparency and accountability. The bill included groundbreaking measures: mandatory body cameras with civilian access to footage, a public database of officer conduct records, improved de-escalation training, and community involvement in police academy curriculum. Back at the local police station, new recruits were already experiencing these changes. The training program had been completely revamped, with community members like Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Rodriguez regularly sharing their perspectives with cadets. "Your badge is not a shield from accountability," Chief Roberts told the recruits. "It's a symbol of public trust, and trust must be earned every single day." The website Mr. Patel's daughter created had evolved into a national platform, helping departments across the country track and prevent abuse of power. She'd been invited to speak at police academies about building better community relationships through technology and transparency. At the Capitol, Alex stepped up to the podium. His voice was steady as he addressed the assembled lawmakers. "A month ago, I was just a college student driving home from study group," he began. "Now I understand that change doesn't just happen. We have to make it happen. This bill isn't about punishment, it's about progress." The gallery erupted in applause. Among those clapping was a familiar face: Officer Davidson's former partner, who had become one of the strongest advocates for reform after witnessing years of misconduct. Later that afternoon, local news crews gathered outside the community center where it had all started. The sign out front now read Community Police Partnership Center, a physical symbol of the changes taking place. Inside, Mrs. Thompson was leading a workshop for officers and residents, sharing stories and building understanding. Her cookies had become famous, baking bridges between communities, the local paper called them. "The thing about change," she told the group, "is that it starts with seeing each other as people. Not uniforms, not stereotypes, just people." Chief Roberts had made it mandatory for officers to attend these sessions. The results were already showing: complaints were down, community trust was up, and officers reported feeling more connected to the people they served. At home that evening, Alex scrolled through messages on his phone. People from across the country were sharing how the changes inspired by his experience were affecting their communities. Some police departments had voluntarily adopted the reforms before they became law. "You know what's amazing?" he told his parents over dinner. "A month ago, we were angry and scared. Now we're actually building something better." The doorbell rang. It was Mr. Patel's family with takeout from their restaurant, a weekly tradition that had started after the incident. As they shared food and stories, Alex's phone buzzed with news. The police accountability bill had passed with overwhelming support. Outside, patrol cars still cruised the neighborhood, but something was different. Officers waved to residents, knew their names, stopped to chat. The us versus them mentality was being replaced by a sense of shared community. The final piece of karma came in an unexpected way. Officer Davidson, now working as a security guard, had enrolled in community college classes about social justice and civil rights. His final paper, which somehow leaked online, was titled "How Power Without Accountability Corrupts." A personal journey. As the sun set on another day of positive change, Alex stood in his driveway, the same spot where everything had started. A patrol car slowed down, and the officer inside, one of the new recruits, gave a friendly wave. "See you at the community meeting tomorrow," the officer called out. Alex waved back, smiling. Wouldn't miss it. Mrs. Thompson's bringing cookies. The incident that could have divided a community had instead united it. The video that could have just been another viral moment of outrage had sparked real, lasting change. And the story that could have ended with punishment had transformed into one of progress, proving that sometimes the best karma isn't revenge, it's reform.